Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this hybrid event of the Institute for European, Russian and Eurasian Studies. We are here in person. Some of you are online. Welcome to everybody. We are here to discuss Russian exceptionalisms and having a kind of comparative perspective on the messianic narratives of great power, which of course in the current context is a very important element of the academic and the policy discussion. I'm very pleased to have with us our colleague, Dr. Alicja Curanović, who is Associate Professor at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw in Poland. She has been publishing a lot on Russian foreign policy, the role of religious factors in international relations and in kind of identity and status building. And her latest monograph that I really invite you to look at if you haven't so far is called The Sense of Mission in Russian Foreign Policy, Destined for Greatness. And today, Alicja will present her current research that puts a little bit of comparative perspective into the exceptionalism discussion. So Alicja, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm grateful to Professor Radowell and the Institute to host my talk. As you can see, I'm going to talk about Russian Messianic tradition in a comparative perspective. And the three pictures which you see on the slide, these are, let's say, illustration of three Messianic traditions. Could you make a guess which one is about the Russian Messianic tradition? No, the fortress, besieged fortress in fire, let's say, and this one, let's say, it's Anglo-Saxon, American, and this one is Polish Prometheus, and I promise to all become clearer in a matter of minutes. So before I go into this comparative perspective, I just want to brief you about the project, which I did for several years. I asked myself a question whether messianic motives were still present in post-Soviet Russia's foreign policy. Because we know about messianism in the Russian Empire, we know about something that is Soviet messianism, and what happened after 1999 to this, 1991 to this tradition. So with the support of a team of 4 people, we conducted content analysis of the official discourse on foreign policy of the Russian Federation. By the official discourse, I mean the discourse created by the people in charge of conceptualizing and conducting Russia's foreign policy. So the president, the prime minister, the minister of foreign affairs, but also the ambassadors of Russia to selected international organizations, Ministry of National Defense, a bit of State Duma, Security Council, and Russian Foreign Affairs Council. And what we did, we in fact read 25,000 documents, and we did this content analysis, and we coded it manually. So it took us just a year to do this part of the project. So it was time consuming, but this wasn't the biggest challenge we encountered. I mean, the biggest challenge was find a way to conceptualize messianism in a way that you would be able to trace it in a secular, highly regulated diplomatic language. After all, we don't expect Lavrov to say on a regular basis about Messiah, right? I don't know, eschatology and so on and so forth. So this, what you have, this is the broadest definition of messianism, which is there in the literature. So this is a vision where you have a providence, and the providence has a plan along which history unfolds. And in this plan, there is the chosen one, individual or collective, which has a special role to play. It has to fulfill a mission in order for the history to reach its end. So in fact, there are 3 components in this definition, right? There's the vision of history, there is the imperative to act, and there is universalism in the sense that the way history unfolds, it concerns everyone, not just the chosen one. And then if you think about messianism, messianic motives, and foreign policy, then from those 3 elements, the mission, the imperative to act or imperative to restrain sometimes for actions, is the crucial to follow and to look for messianic motives in foreign policy. That's why I made mission the main category of the research. And the mission in foreign policy has 3 components. Kind of conviction, now we are already talking about a country, that it has a special destiny. And since it has been chosen, it has moral superiority in comparison to other actors of international relations. And there is universalist element. And the universalist component, it's interesting because it got transformed quite much. Before, we would associate mission, messianism in foreign policy with kind of need to self-sacrifice, right? And if you look into the foreign policy discourse countries, they do like to boast about sacrifices they did for other nations in the past, whether it's saving South Slavs in the 19th century when we are talking about Russia, or the great sacrifice during the Second World War. But when it comes to contemporary politics, they don't talk about the need to self-sacrifice national interests. But what they do, they emphasize that they are not just pursuing in their foreign policy egoistic national interests, but they always care for the benefit or the interest of the broader community. So what, let's say, Russia is doing, it's not just for the benefit of Russia, but for example, the neighborhood, the countries of certain affiliation, I don't know, Slavic countries, Christian countries, or even maybe the whole humankind, right? So keep it in mind, because maybe later, I hope we'll have time to show some quotations, and then it will come back. Will you tell me when I have 5 minutes to finish or something? Okay. So with those three components, right, two are definitely about expressing exceptionalism. And you could say, okay, but all nations think they are special or exceptional in some way. And this is fair. I mean, this is part of nationalism and identity building. But I would dare to say that not all nations, they express their exceptionalism by talking about mission in their foreign policy, right? So not to go into the details, but Czechia would be case in point. You have Czechs, and they think that they are special and different from other nations, but they haven't developed a tradition of kind of messianic thinking about their foreign policy, right? And then you can say, okay, in fact, it's a feature of, shall I?
No, you're good.
No, I'm good. Okay. It's a feature of great power politics. And I will try to critically verify also this claim. But for a moment, let's stick with this. So let's say that it's about great powers and they pursue mission in their foreign policies. But still, they do it, their mission narratives, they differ. And the question is, why do they differ? And Alfred Reber in 1994 said it's culture. Right? So about Russian imperial mission, he said it was no more or less particularist than the mission of United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Japan. It was simply cast in a different cultural mode. So we say, okay, it's culture, so it's about domestic affairs, that's that. And of course, this is a part of the story, and true, but I would say it's not the whole story about why mission narratives differ, right? Because the element we should be at here, I would say it's status. The standing a country has in the international hierarchy, it has influence on the function of mission narrative and also on its content. So let's start with the status and a function, right? So despite the claims that all nations are sovereign and equal, right, we know that there are multiple hierarchies in international community, and the countries have their standing based on their material power, but also on their symbolic capital. So the ability to, to define criteria of right and wrong, of recognition, and the capacity to contribute to normative order. And now let me recall the dichotomy used by Aisha Zarakol while writing about great powers and the contact between European imperial powers and Russian Empire, Japan, and Ottoman Empire. That we can talk about established states and aspiring states. In general, so we are talking here about states which have attributes of great power. So significant territory, significant population, sophisticated culture, their own sphere of influence, but they differ in fact. Of course, they differ in material powers, but they also differ in their symbolic capital. Established states, these are the states in a dominant position, right? They dominate also the normative order. They decide about the criteria of right, wrong, entry, and recognition, other states as their peers. And aspiring states, these are states which have also attributes of great powers like territory, everything what I have just enumerated before. But in terms of symbolic capital, they are weaker than those established states. And if established states, if they refer to mission in their foreign policy, they do it in order to legitimate their dominant position, right? But when it comes to aspiring states, the mission narrative, it has a double function. On the one hand, this is a way to compensate for their inferiority right, in relation to established states. So they say we might be worse than you in terms of material power, but we are morally superior, we have our culture, and they emphasize this element, right? But at the same time, talking about mission, their foreign policy, it's an emulation practice. They do it because established states do it. And at the end of the day, they do hope that this will be one of the ways to get finally the recognition and be allowed to this, let's say, exclusive club, right? And to this dichotomy, established states and aspiring states, I would add losers when it comes to mission narrative. So these which don't have any attributes of great power, they still refer to mission in their foreign policy, and they do it purely for compensation. So now let's put one more element. Aspiring states, as I said, they might have their own, and they usually do, they have their own sphere of influence where they have a dominant position. And when they are in this position and they claim to have a mission, they do it exactly in the way the established states do. So they do it to legitimate their hegemony, right? If you think about Russia and its immediate neighborhood, so this is how it works, right? And now let's compare Russia and Poland. So the loser, Poland is definitely an example of a loser, and Russia is an aspiring state. 19th century, this is the period, the formative period for shaping this kind of structure of Russian and Polish Messianic traditions. So if you take the literature, the books written by Peter Duncan, Walicki, or Vladimir Storchak, they all emphasize that in Russia at this time, in fact, we have two currents of Messianism. One is compensatory. It's connected to the myth of the Holy Rules. It's connected to its functions to make sense of suffering of Russian people, mostly Russian peasantry, right? But at the same time, another current is getting stronger and becoming, is appearing in the forefront, is the imperial one, connected to the Third Rome myth, which legitimates Russia's expansion to Eurasia, and it's connected, of course, to emphasizing Russia's exceptional path and exceptional destiny. And if you now compare it to Poland, I mean, where there is a very strong Messianic tradition shaped at the same period, it's first and foremost only compensatory, right? Poland is a loser. It lost its sovereignty at the end of 18th century. There is a chain of national uprisings, all lost, and a great national catastrophe every time in the afterwar of an uprising. So the Messianic narrative is there to make sense of this tragedy, and it's about glorifying suffering and make sense of this victimhood. And we have a whole narrative about Poland as a Christ of nations, that Poland is the Christ, which with its suffering is going to redeem the sins of Europe and then bring the spiritual revival. And now let's stay with the loser for a moment. When Poland regained its independence in 1918, there are still Messianic references in its foreign policy, but there is no emphasis anymore on the need to self-sacrifice and suffering. There is no mentioning Poland as a Jesus Christ of Europe. There is another figure, though, brought in the narrative. This is Poland as Prometheus. So Greek, ancient hero, which, liberates other nations. And the main idea is that Poland, as the one which has made it, is going to liberate other nations still enslaved by Russia. So still Messianic, but with a different spin, showing certain self-confidence of a country which regained its independence, knows how to do it, and so it can, lead others. But it's also partly about status signaling behavior here. Poland has ambitions to be this kind of regional power in Central Eastern Europe after 1918, and it will lead those other nations, right? It will take the initiative. And now let's try to compare Russia, aspiring country, with an established one, right? I had once an opportunity to speak to Condoleezza Rice, and I asked her how she would define Messianism in foreign policy. And I said, it's pretty straightforward. Messianism is the desire in your foreign policy to turn others into your own image and liking. And I thought, well, this is an accurate description, but in fact, it's an accurate description of Messianic tradition of established states. These which have Messianic tradition, which is to legitimate their dominant position, right? And this is, let's, if we are to put it with a kind of symbolic figure, it's about this kind of crusader type. You go, you venture to the world, and you turn it in your own image and liking. And if you think about Russian Messianic tradition, it's rather not about being a crusader, but rather a shield holder. Russia envisions itself as a force which protects the world, restores the order, which restores justice, right? So it's a kind of shield holder versus crusader. If you think about these two different types of Messianic tradition, it doesn't mean, that, I don't know, that the crusader is more aggressive than the shield holder, that one is better or worse. You can be a very aggressive shield holder, and you can, as we can see, you can attack and still claim you're just defending yourself, right? So if we were now to compare it, let's put Russia and United Kingdom, but we could just put, Russia as an aspiring state and other established states, so United States, France, European former imperial powers. So if you think about the nature of their Messianic roles, they are progressive. The main idea is to bring the progress and the fruit of the progress to other nations, right? So we already have it here, I don't know, United Kingdom, United States. So now we will make others to enjoy it as well. Right. And when you think about Russia, it's usually about the bringing balance, restoring justice, guarding the stability, right? It's about, it's in nature, it's conservative or restored to restore the good old days, right? The Messianic narrative of established countries is hegemonic. It's to legitimate the dominance. In terms of Russia, if you think about in the historic perspective, its Messianic tradition is in a way a counter-hegemonic response to the normative pressure which Russia feels and starts to experience in the 18th, 19th century, right? Another difference is one of the components of established states Messianic tradition is that, okay, if you don't want to be a crusader which simply goes, ventures and turns forcefully others into your image and liking, you can at least stay at home, but be so great that others will lead you, so leading by example. But it still assumes certain thing that you have an impact of the external world, even if you're not exactly a crusader. And in Russian Messianic tradition, this element, leading by example, is really marginal. But what's there instead is kind of that you first have to save Russia and isolate it from the world to be able later on to fulfill the mission and to save the world. So this kind of, I call it auto mission. So when the chosen one first must save itself in order to be able to go later and save the rest of the humankind. And it's more about this kind of being passive and exactly building a wall, let's say building a fortress which is besieged by the threatening external environment. And then two different values are in the core of those traditional Messianic traditions. With the Western world, it's freedom, right? Bringing freedom to other nations. In Russia, it's justice. It's restoring justice. And again, well, I would say that this is the difference in those values show also the difference in this position. So if you're an underdog and you feel pressed, if you're ontologically insecure, justice is much more important than freedom to you in a way, right? And those different figures symbolizing those Messianic traditions. So crusader here and the katechon, right? The shield holder. So we say, oh, Russian is Messianic, United States is Messianic, but then if you go and you compare the structures of those ideas, in the core, they are different, right? So sorry, I couldn't find a better one. So if this is the, let's say, established state kind of Messianic tradition that you go, you venture, and they have this ontological confidence, this would be rather Russia, this kind of being here and protecting itself and others, they want it or not, right? And now to give some quotations here. We wrote an article with my colleague comparing Russian contemporary official policy discourse and also British post-Brexit when Conservative Party launched this project named Global Britain. And if you see those ideas, they keep coming back, right? Britain's hand in designing and defending the world order in the last century surely was our mission. For the next, not a superpower, but a global power. So connection to status, right? Binding together democracies who share our values. And the decisive role in making the world safer, healthier, welfare. Sense of national purpose has always been defined by more than narrow self-interest, right? It's always for the others, not just for ourselves. it's not enough to lead. We need to make sure that we are taking everyone along with us, right? This is not just in the interest of British citizens, all peoples. This is a force for good in the world, that champion British values around the globe. So exactly, to go and turn people into our image and like it, right? It's a protector and so on and so forth, right? Now, yeah. So for now, I was talking just about European countries, right? Because in a sense, if you try to look for patterns, this is a European affair. What makes it more probable that you will, let's say, detect mission in foreign policy, there are two factors: that you have a great power which had imperial past and Judeo-Christian tradition. Of course, I should make a mark. What about Islam and Islamic countries? I keep it in mind, but I didn't go into this direction, because for Russia, Judeo-Christian tradition was like the crucial part of its tradition, identity, and the point of reference. So this is a European phenomenon. And if we are to ask ourselves whether non-European countries, global powers, refer to mission also like others, I would say that we would have to consider the factor how much they were exposed to colonialism and how they reacted to this, let's say, European normative pressure. So let's have a look at this one, right? We have Japan and China, definitely two countries with a very strong sense of exceptionalism, right? Neither was colonized, but they reacted differently to Western pressure, right? Japan went into emulation, right? Decided what to pick up and so on. And part of this emulation was using references to mission in its foreign policy in this period, late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, right? When you have the strong Japanese imperialism, which is fashioned in the way like European imperialisms are, right? But apart from this period, so after the Second World War, we have a lot of texts, papers, books about Japanese exceptionalism, but there are no really references that Japan is pursuing a special mission in the world, right? They express their exceptionalism differently. Now, if you look about China, not colonized, and the country didn't decide to emulate Europe, with a strong sense of exceptionalism, they don't show this kind of ideas that you should pursue a mission in the world, right? There is an article written by Jane Wilson, and she says, they feel exceptional, and this exceptionalism is connected to this kind of deep understanding that their path cannot be repeated by any other nation. So this is a different type of thinking, what it means to be exceptional, how can it be translated into foreign policy, right? So I would say that these are examples of non-messianic exceptionalism. So you can have great powers which feel exceptional, but they won't translate it into talking about pursuing kind of grand mission in the world. And finally, let's say India, so an Asian country, but which was colonized, right, and exposed to hegemonic messianic tradition of United Kingdom. And there we find this kind of references, right? So talking about moral superiority and that India has a special mission in the world, this is to harmonize and soothe ethnic, religious, and civilization differences, that it wants to lead by example, because to show the world the virtue of restraint, which is deeply embedded in its culture. So this is a kind of counter-hegemonic move. You use the hegemonic, narrative. You changed it in order to legitimate your claim to be recognized as an equal among other countries after 1947, right, or 48, when India gained independence. And finally, about Russia. So messianic motives, they are present in today's Russia's official discourse, but they are not the mainstream. They are on the margins. They appear once in a while in certain statements, right? And to make it even more complicated, if you approach Vladimir Putin or Sergei Lavrov and ask, how about Russia's missions today in the world? They will they will deny it. They will also reject it as a notion, say, we don't do it anymore. This is something what brought the Soviet Union to its fall, because the Soviet Union didn't think about its own interests. We are pragmatic. We are done with this part of our tradition, right? And yet they keep referring to mission in the official discourse, right? So the question is why? You want to get rid of it, and yet you still do it. And my explanation is because pursuing mission in the world is understood as an attribute of a great power. This is what great powers do. So again, the connection to status, right? If you are a great power, and you're serious about it. It's not enough that you have a great trade balance or you have great infrastructure projects, right? Or even military capacity. You have to have a grand idea to pursue universally in the world. Just check Sergei Karaganov, the world is full of the graves and corpses of major powers which have lost their sense of mission. One of the foundations of world power, right? And Russia can't be anything else but a great power, so a very strong component of Russia's identity, right? Is pursuit of a grand idea for its own sake and for the sake of others. Again, so it's not just for us, it's for everybody, right? So this is why this kind of messianic motives still appear. These are the Messianic roles which we reconstructed from the analysis of the discourse. Maybe we'll come to this to unpack them because I have a slide, what each one means, but maybe we'll come to this in Q&A if you are interested. Maybe I would rather give you some quotations here. So this is Putin referring to Berdyaev, that he spoke about Russia's mission as a strong, independent country which defends truth and justice. But understanding this historical role lies at the foundations of our nation's self-awareness, right? It defines our present and our future. Then this is about this idea that Russia is the great shield which protects on and on Europe and the world. So Russia, which the civilized Europe saw as something foreign and dangerous, frequently saved Europe from existential threats. And we have, Batu Khan, and we have 1814 Napoleon, and then we have Balkans, and then, of course, the Second World War, and saved numerous nations of Europe from annihilation. Then we have Lavrov. Our country is historically entitled to the role of one of the leading centrals, a country providing values, security, and stability. Then we have Patriarch Kirill. The Russia is, returning to fulfilling its historical role as patron defender of the Orthodox Church in countries where the Orthodox are in the minority. This is the traditional mission of our country. Putin, there's a good old days, 2005, that Russia should continue its civilizing mission on the Euro-Asian continent. This mission consists in ensuring the democratic values combined with national interest and reach and our historic community. Now, this is in a depth about civilization mission, but let me leave this, maybe this one. Since the very beginning of the space age, we have been aware of our special historic mission, and we have not just explored space in a purely technological way. We have had a spiritual attachment to space. It has been an object of our national pride. What is really, I don't know if surprising, but it is really important to emphasize the relevance of the West for this narrative, because in fact it's the only geopolitical entity which appears in messianic claims of Russia. So this is the main source of apocalypse. Most of Russia's messianic roles, which are ascribed to Russia by its elite, are connected to the threat posed directly or indirectly by the West. But the West is also an object of Russia's saving attempts. If only the West would let Russia could save, especially Europe, but also United States, if they were wise enough, Russia could also save the West and show the right path. It's the notion messianism, how it's used, most of the times Russian diplomats say that exactly we don't do it, this is what the West does. That this is a kind of Western policy, so othering mechanism. They do it, we don't. But then in the second move, they do it. They go into counter-hegemonic thing. They do it. They translate, and we have a better definition of exceptionalism than Americans or the West in the foreign policy. This is something Vladimir Putin said, that we believe states are not exceptional but unique and equal in their uniqueness, and this is a God's given principle, and this definition, understanding of exceptionalism is better, it's morally superior than the was presented by the West. We are coming to the end, I promise. So two more things. One, the historical stickiness of the messianic roles ascribed to Russia. If you look at these roles, all of them, apart from those two in red, they can be already found in the texts in the 19th century. What is Russia's mission in the world? So that it's a bridge, moderator of the dialogue, or that it's a guardian of justice, global balance provider, and so on and so forth. Only these two are connected to the post-Soviet context. So the maker of Ruski Mir in connection to Russian diaspora outside Russian Federation's border, and keeper of historical truth is connected to the Second World War. Russia has to release predestined to keep the truth about this event, the truthful narrative, right? And the question is why? Why is it so sticky? Why it hasn't changed? Russia has been for so many changes during only the 20th century, right? And my explanation would be that this has also something to do with this status dissonance, which Russia experienced in the 19th century in relations to European, let's say, Western countries, right? Feeling so inferior and trying to be recognized as one, and so trying to compensate and emulate. And she found itself in the same position after 1991, right? Trying to find out about its new identity and in relations to the West. So at the end of the day, I conclude that we are talking about a kind of phantom messianism in Russia, because this is a narrative and practices connected to the narrative, which were established long time ago, 18th, 19th century, right? And empire is gone, but those practices, narrative routines, they stayed. And after 1991, it was a question whether, whether this, Russia was not empire anymore, so whether messianism would stay as this kind of part of foreign policy discourse. And it's still there, as I said, because it's connected to understanding what a great power is. And if you see, for the majority of Russians, including ordinary Russians and elites, this is absolutely no discussion point. Russia must be great power. This is a crucial component of a post-Soviet Russia's identity. But the difference comes here. Like, how should this be achieved, right? Ordinary Russians, just 30% would say, okay, we are ready for self-sacrifice and we want our country to pursue great goals. Otherwise, they would like this to be pursued in a way, achieved in a way like just reforming Russia at home, building better roads, providing better hospitals, improving educational system, right? The difference here with the elite, right? Here, the majority of the elite think, that since Russia is the great power, it's destined for greatness and it should go for this kind of great idea. So it's much more on the elite and its elite responsibility after 1991, what would happen with the messianic claims, right? And of course, with the war in Ukraine and this kind of imperial context becoming again very strong in Russian foreign policy, I would say we should expect more of this kind of messianic claims, or at least that it will stay longer and won't disappear. And the final slide, this is Alexei Levinson already commenting on the war in 2022. And he writes, from Levada Center, Russian sociologists, right? One should be skeptical about the widespread justification that this state of Russian consciousness is solely the result of propaganda. Propaganda can do a lot, but it has its limits. Propaganda only formalizes and articulates the configurations of meaning which are formed in mass conscious due to internal and external factors. Propaganda is only one of them. These mass perceptions are long entrenched. They represent the complex outcome of the transformation of ideas about Russia's mission, which have developed over several centuries in the Russian ruling class and which have outlived that class. The ideas were unconsciously embraced by Russia's victorious new elites who imagined Russia leading the liberation of mankind. That the goal of liberation was forgotten, but the idea of standing at the helm of the half of the world, if not the whole world, remained.